I used to have a very strange habit. Every time I decided to change my life, everything would last about 3 days. On the first day, I was full of motivation. I cleaned my desk. I made a to-do list. I went to bed early. The next morning I woke up early and exercised. It felt like I had just started a new version of myself. The second day was still fine. The third day started to loosen a little. By the fourth day, I was back to my old self again. Scrolling on my phone before bed, procrastinating on work, snacking mindlessly, and telling myself, "Alright, I'll start again tomorrow." The problem was that I didn't actually want to live like that. I knew staying up late wasn't good. I knew procrastination made me more stressed. I knew my old habits were slowing me down compared to the goals I wanted to achieve. But the strange thing is, knowing is not enough to change. Sometimes I even blamed myself quite harshly. I thought maybe I lacked discipline. Maybe my willpower was weak. Or maybe I was simply lazy. But the more I started learning about how the brain works, the more I realized something slightly uncomfortable. Maybe the problem isn't willpower. Maybe the problem is that our brain genuinely hates change. Not hate in an emotional sense, but hate in a biological design sense. The brain is built to conserve energy, avoid risk, and stick to what is familiar. Because to the brain, familiar equals safe, even when that familiar thing isn't actually good for your life. So sometimes going back to old habits isn't because you are weak. It's because you are fighting against a very ancient survival mechanism in the brain. And if you don't understand that
it's easy
mechanism,
to get lost in the scroll.
every attempt to change will feel like pushing a rock uphill
But
only to
where
watch
does
it
all
roll
that
down
time
again.
go?
After reading quite a lot of neuroscience material, I realized something a bit disappointing. Our brains are not designed to constantly change. They are designed to conserve energy and reduce risk. To understand this, imagine the brain as a large city. Every action you perform daily, brushing your teeth, opening your phone, making coffee, procrastinating on work, is like a road in that city. The first time you do something new, it's like opening a path through a forest. Hard to walk, slow, requires a lot of energy. But if you walk that path every day, the brain begins to pave it, widen it, and install streetlights. This is what science calls neural pathways. These pathways are strengthened with the help of a very famous neurotransmitter, dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the happiness hormone. In reality, it functions more like a learning signal. When the brain sees that a behavior leads to a pleasant feeling, even something small like scrolling your phone or eating sweets, dopamine signals to the nervous system. "Ah, this seems worth remembering. Do it again next time." Over time, the brain begins to automate the behavior. A region called the basal ganglia acts like an autopilot system. It allows you to perform many actions without needing to think too much. That sounds good. And it is good if the habit is running, reading, or sleeping on time. But if the habit is procrastination, late night snacking, or mindless scrolling, then problems start to appear. Because once a behavior becomes a habit, the brain treats it like a highway. While the new behavior, like exercising or putting down your phone, feels like a rocky dirt road. And the brain is extremely practical. It always asks a very simple question. Which road requires less energy? Most of the time, the answer is the old habit. So when you try to change, the difficulty you feel is not imaginary. You are asking the brain to abandon a highway and return to a forest path. And the brain really doesn't like that. Once I understood this mechanism, I started looking back at many of my own behaviors, and things suddenly made a lot more sense. The simplest example is scrolling on the phone. While working, I know perfectly well that I shouldn't open social media. I even clearly understand the consequences: losing focus, extending my work hours, and feeling stressed later in the evening. But it only takes a moment of fatigue, boredom, or creative block, and my hand automatically reaches for the phone. Not because I consciously decide to do it, but because the brain has already learned a pathway. Tired right pointing arrow, open phone right pointing arrow, small dopamine hit right pointing arrow, temporary relief. It's like a pressure release button. For the first few minutes, it feels quite good. The mind relaxes a little. Sometimes it even feels like a reasonable break. But after 20 to 30 minutes, the story starts to change. The work is still there. Time is gone. The brain has to rebuild focus from scratch. And often it comes with a bit of self-blame. What's interesting is that the brain remembers the reward more strongly than the cost. Dopamine strongly records the moment of immediate pleasure. But the consequences that happen later, stress, lack of sleep, pressure, are processed in different systems and are less directly tied to the original behavior. So next time, when you feel tired or bored, the brain still thinks, opening the phone helps me feel better. It doesn't clearly remember the rest of the story. That's why many bad habits have a very similar structure. Short-term, relief. Long-term, consequences. Late night eating. Procrastination. Staying up late to watch just one more video. In that moment, the brain chooses immediate comfort instead of long-term stability. Not because you are stupid, but because the human biological system evolved to prioritize short-term survival. The problem is that in the modern world, instant comfort is everywhere. And if you don't understand this, it's very easy to think the problem lies in your personality. When in reality, it lies in how the brain learns and stores habits. There was a mistake I made for a very long time. I believed the goal of changing habits was to become a completely disciplined person. The kind of person who never procrastinates, never mindlessly scrolls on the phone, never returns to old habits. It sounds nice. But the problem is, the human brain doesn't work that way. If you look honestly at how the nervous system operates, you'll notice an uncomfortable truth. The brain always tends to return to what is familiar. Not because you failed, but because the brain's energy-saving mechanism never disappears. So if your goal is something like, from today on, I will never procrastinate again, then sooner or later you will almost certainly return to the same place. And when that happens, many people fall into a familiar loop. Failure right pointing arrow, self-blame right pointing arrow, discouragement right pointing arrow, quitting the change altogether. Interestingly, in behavioral science, the goal is not framed that way. A more realistic goal is reduce friction for good habits and increase friction for bad habits. In simple terms, don't try to turn yourself into a perfectly disciplined robot. Design your environment so that the brain finds it easier to choose better options. For example, if your phone is right next to your bed, the brain will always choose the easiest path, pick it up. But if the phone is placed in another room, you've created a small friction. Not huge, but enough for the brain to pause and reconsider. It sounds simple, but it represents a big shift in thinking. The goal is not to defeat your brain. The goal is to understand how it works and play by its rules. Instead of forcing the brain to become something it was never designed to be. When viewed this way, changing habits is no longer a battle of willpower. It becomes more like designing a life system. And you only need to make that system resist you a little less each day. After understanding how the brain works, I realized something important. Habit change doesn't happen in a single moment of determination. It happens across many small moments throughout the day. If you rely purely on willpower at your weakest moment, you will almost certainly lose. At that point, the brain is simply too tired to make good decisions. So a more practical approach is preparation. Before the habit happens. This is when you have the most control. For example, if you know you tend to scroll your phone mindlessly at night, change your environment before nighttime arrives. Place the phone away from the bed. Put a book or podcast headphones near your pillow. Use app limit features. The mechanism is simple. Reduce the old highway and make the new roads slightly easier. Limitation. If a habit is deeply ingrained, like heavy social media addiction, environmental changes may reduce frequency, but they won't completely eliminate it. When the urge appears, this moment often lasts only a few minutes. Instead of trying to fight it directly, a useful strategy is to delay for 2 to 5 minutes. Tell yourself, okay, I can still scroll, but let's wait 3 minutes. In many behavioral studies, urges behave like waves. If you don't act on them immediately, their intensity often drops quite quickly. Limitation. When you are extremely tired, sleep deprived, or under heavy stress, this technique may become less effective. After slipping back into the old habit, this is where many people make the biggest mistake. The common reaction is intense self-criticism. But that actually triggers stress, which pushes the brain to seek familiar comforting behaviors again. Which means, the loop becomes stronger. A more useful response is to treat it as data. I returned to the old habit while I was tired and hungry. This helps you understand the trigger conditions instead of simply blaming yourself. The next day, long term. New habits require repetition for the brain to build a new road. Not a few days. Usually several weeks or months. So the goal isn't perfection. The goal is returning faster each time you slip. Each time you return, you are paving a little more asphalt onto the new road in your brain. Slow, but real. After reading many studies about the brain, one realization brought me a surprising sense of relief. Many things we think are personality flaws are actually just how the nervous system works. Returning to old habits is not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes it simply means the brain is doing its job. Conserving energy, choosing familiar paths, avoiding risk. For hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, that mechanism helped humans survive. The only difference is that in the modern world, those familiar paths sometimes lead to things that are not good for us. Overeating, sleep deprivation, phone addiction, chronic procrastination. So instead of treating change as a battle against yourself, I started looking at it differently. It's more like training a system. The brain learns through repetition and clear signals, not through yelling at it. You can't shout at a GPS and expect it to magically find a better route. You have to enter the destination again and follow the direction multiple times. The brain works the same way. Each time you return to a good habit, even a small one, you are updating the map inside your nervous system. Slow, but real. The important thing is not to turn this process into an extreme mission. Real life always includes days when you're tired, busy, or simply not motivated. That doesn't destroy everything. Habits are not built from one perfect day. They are built from hundreds of times you return after slipping. In the end, I think knowledge like this has a very simple value. It doesn't instantly make life easier, but it gives you agency. You understand why you do what you do. And when you understand the mechanism, you have more opportunities to adjust your personal system in a more sustainable direction. Not perfect, but more stable over time. The content in this video is based on a synthesis of research in neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and human biology, then explained in everyday language to make the ideas easier to understand. However, this is not personal medical advice and cannot replace diagnosis or treatment from a doctor or healthcare professional. Each person has a different nervous system, life situation, and health condition. If you are experiencing serious issues related to mental health, behavioral disorders, addiction, sleep disorders, or are currently using medication, please consult a qualified medical professional before applying any lifestyle changes. The purpose of this video is simply to help you better understand how the brain works, so you can have another perspective when making choices that are healthier and more sustainable for your life.